Mr. Clement.
Mr. Chief Justice, and may it please the Court, the constitutionality of the Act's massive expansion of Medicaid depends on the answer to two related questions. First, is the expansion coercive? And second, does that coercion matter?
Mr. Clement, can I ask you just a matter of clarification? Would you be making the same argument if instead of the federal government picking up 90% of the cost, the federal government picked up 100% of the cost?
Justice Kagan, if everything else in the statute remained the same, I would be making the exact same argument.
If the inevitable consequence of your position was that the federal government could just do this on its own, the federal government could have Medicaid, Medicare, and these insurance regulations, assume that's true, then how are the interests of federalism concerned? How is the interest of federalism concerned if in Florida or Texas or some of the other objecting states, there are huge federal bureaucracies doing what this bill allows the state bureaucracies to do? I know you've thought about that. I'd just like your answer.
I have, and I'd like to elaborate, but the one-word answer is accountability. If the federal government decides to spend money through federal instrumentalities and the citizen is hacked off about it, they can bring a federal complaint to a federal official working in a federal agency. And what makes this so pernicious is that the federal government knows that the citizenry is not going to take lightly the idea that there are huge new federal bureaucracies popping up across the country. And so they get the benefit of administering this program through state officials, but then it makes it very confusing for the citizen who doesn't like this. Do they complain to the state official because it's being administered by a state official in a state building?
But Mr. Clement, that is very confusing because the idea behind cooperative federal-state programs was exactly a federalism idea. It was to give the states the ability to administer those programs. It was to give the states a great deal of flexibility in running those programs, and that's exactly what Medicaid is.
General Verrilli.
Mr. Chief Justice, and may it please the Court, if I may just say in conclusion that I'd like to take half a step back here, that with this provision, the Medicaid expansion that we're talking about this afternoon, and the provisions we talked about yesterday, we've been talking about them in terms of their effect as measures that solve problems in the economic marketplace that have resulted in millions of people not having health care because they can't afford insurance. There is an important connection, a profound connection between that problem and liberty. And I do think it's important that we not lose sight of that in this population of Medicaid-eligible people who will receive health care that they cannot now afford under this Medicaid expansion, there will be millions of people with chronic conditions like diabetes and heart disease. And as a result of the health care that they will get, they will be unshackled from the disabilities that those diseases put on them and have the opportunity to enjoy the blessings of liberty. And the same thing will be true for a husband whose wife is diagnosed with breast cancer and who won't face the prospect of being forced into bankruptcy to try to get care for his wife and face the risk of having to raise his children alone. And I could multiply example after example after example. In a very fundamental way, this Medicaid expansion, as well as the provisions we discussed yesterday, secure the blessings of liberty. And I think that is important as the Court is considering these issues, that be kept in mind. The Congress struggled with the issue of how to deal with this profound problem of 40 million people without health care for many years. And it made a judgment. And its judgment is one that is, I think, in conformity with what lots of experts thought was the best complex of options to handle this problem. Maybe they were right, maybe they weren't. But this is something about which the people of the United States can deliberate and they vote. And if they think it needs to be changed, they can change it. And I would suggest to the Court, with profound respect for the Court's obligation to ensure that the federal government remains a government of enumerated powers, that this is not a case in any of its aspects that calls that into question, that this was a judgment of policy that democratically accountable branches of this government made by their best lights. And I would urge this Court to respect that judgment and ask that the Affordable Care Act in its entirety be upheld. Thank you.